So, buenos tardes. My name is Mark Colon, and I am the Director of Public Engagement for NTIA at the Department of Commerce. And I've been asked to introduce my boss, Assistant Secretary of Commerce, Alan Davidson. And so I'm not sure if any of you have been asked to introduce your boss to an audience of outspoken Hispanic activists. But I've got to say, no pressure at all. But in all honesty, it's not a very difficult job, I can tell you, because after working closely with Alan for 2 years now, I can honestly say that he is absolutely the right man for the significant portfolio of jobs and projects that he and Juan are going to be speaking to you about. He's absolutely the right man for the job. As for credentials, Alan leads NTIA, the President's Principal Advisor on Telecommunications and Information Policy. As NTIA's administrator, Assistant Secretary Davidson oversees a federal agency with more than 500 employees working to close the digital divide, manage federal spectrum policy, and build a better internet. Alan has spent the last 25 years working at the intersection of internet technology, public policy, and the law. Before joining NTIA, he worked as the Mozilla Foundation's Vice President of Global Policy, Trust, and Security. Prior to that, Alan served in the Obama-Biden administration. I suspect some of you have heard of that administration. As the first director of digital economy for the Department of Commerce. Alan has been a long-time leader in the internet nonprofit community, serving as the director of New America's Open Technology Institute, where he worked to promote equitable broadband access and adoption. As associate director of the Center for Democracy and Technology, Alan was an advocate for civil liberties and human rights online in some of the earliest internet policy debates. And I can tell you that as soon as I got to NTIA, Alan said one of the first meetings that he wanted me to help get set up was with LULAC. He's a graduate of Massachusetts Institute of Technology and the Yale Law School, which I know is near and dear to my heart as my alma mater. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I give you Assistant Secretary of Commerce, Alan Davidson.
Me?
I think so.
Is this on? All right. Wonderful. Alan, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's terrific to be here. First of all, thank you, Mark. It's always really appreciate the shout out, and it's great to be here. Juan, it's great to be here at LULAC. And Mark is not wrong when he said, like, one of the first things I did ask for when he joined was to set up a meeting, because I've known LULAC for a long time, since before my time in government, well before my time in government, back in the private sector, and I've had a huge amount of respect for the organization, and I have to say I've learned a lot from you and your colleagues, so it's great to be here.
Well, we're grateful to have you here, and also let me just say thank you so much to Mark and to Mara. They have really been incredible allies as we work through the labyrinth of what is our federal government and the Department of Commerce and certainly NTIA. We have absolutely incredible respect for the work that the agency does and the people, the good people that staff the agency. So thank you so much. So we're just going to go ahead and just jump right into it. Very, very impressive biography, Alan. Makes me a little bit jealous.
Well, you know a thing or two about tech too, so
a little bit about tech. But you began your career as a computer scientist and later transitioned into policy and advocacy roles. How have your technology background and experience in the private sector shaped your approach to telecommunications and information policy in your current role?
That's a great question, and I'm sort of like a fallen computer scientist. I sometimes say, like, my background was as a computer scientist, but I ultimately like went to law school, became a lawyer, and then have spent a lot of time in and out of government. And I will say I feel very lucky to have had that background. And you know the tech world too. So many of the big issues that we are going to be facing as a society, some of the biggest challenges, issues like privacy and cybersecurity, and so many of the changes that are happening in our society are being driven by technology. And so many of the big opportunities we have are being driven by technology. Better jobs, solving some of the big challenges facing the planet, they're all being driven by technology. So I feel like we have a need in Washington for more people who can speak both languages, or bilingual in a slightly different way than we sometimes talk about here, right? So bilingual in both technology and in policy and thinking about how technology affects society. And I've been very lucky to have that background coming in, and in my current job, well, part of my job is to think about telecommunications and how we get people connected to the internet and big issues like AI, policy, and I've been really lucky to have had this background as a technologist, but also working in companies, working in nonprofit groups and in government.
That's wonderful, that's great. Now, with your history as an advocate in both the private and nonprofit sectors, how do you see the balance between advancing technology and protecting users' rights, especially in the terms of privacy and the open internet?
Well, that's a great question. Great question. I think it can't be an either or is the short answer. It has to be both. And I'll step back and say I have had a chance to work as an advocate. I have both sort of working for an early internet civil rights organization, the Center for Democracy and Technology, more recently at the New America Foundation. And you know, it's interesting because these public interest groups play such a huge role in our ecosystem. So that's always why also groups like LULAC, you know, how do we make decisions that are in the public interest? We need people who are thinking and talking about the public interest, all of the different parts of the public interest in our decision making. When it comes to these big hard issues like privacy, you know, we need to be thinking, we've always had a view in our country, we want to be pro-innovation, right? We want to have these cool companies thrive. And we are the envy of the world in terms of the companies and the industry, the tech industry that we have. But we have to also make sure that we're protecting consumers in all of this. And so I think my views on this have been shaped by my time in the public interest and feeling there's a huge public interest perspective. We got to protect consumers. We got big challenges like privacy, cybersecurity, bias in AI. We have to get both right. We have to get innovation and consumer protection.
And so there's a really big drive to get online. You know, I think all of us have one device that we carry with us everywhere that we go. When we're at home, we're connected via different products, be it smart TVs or apps and iPads and iPhones. And we talk a lot about broadband access. But we really don't talk about what happens when you get online, right? And that's really what we're talking about here. You know, protecting our young kids and our youth. I'm a father of 3 kids, a 9-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 16-year-old now, right? Are there enough?
You're seeing it all,
yeah,
right?
I'm seeing it all in real time. They're growing up way too fast. Are there enough guardrails for our children when it comes to this issue, not just of privacy, but content that's currently out there?
So it's very interesting. I think this is one of the biggest challenges we face in Washington right now that we need help with, which is how do we make sure we're protecting the mental health and safety of young people online. And I hear about it. I work on broadband, but I travel all over the country, and it's probably the #1 thing I hear, both from parents and from young people, is about this challenge. And I see we have young people in the room here to help us think about this. But I co-chair a task force that the president created on kids' online health and mental safety, mental health and safety, I'm sorry. I co-chair it with some experts in the Department of Health and Human Services, we've got the Surgeon General, we've got a whole bunch of people, and we're thinking about these really hard issues. And I think one thing that we've started to realize is the old way of looking at this, you know, maybe 10 or 15 years ago was, we just need to keep the kids off the phones longer, right? Like, you know, we just need to say, don't use your phone too soon, don't get on, you know, social media too soon. And I think one of the big messages we've heard is people want to be online, right? Parents, you probably want your young children to be able to look at an iPad, right? Parents want their kids to have a phone so that they can call them after school, so that they can be safe, right? Young people want to be on these social media systems, and saying don't get online is almost shaming people into saying, like, doing something they want to do. It is our job to make sure that young people are safe when they get online, and that is a giant challenge now. And I think it's something that it can't just be on young people, and it can't just be on parents. We need to take more action as a government, and the companies who create these services, they need to take more steps to make sure that kids are safe when they're online. So it's not about saying, like, don't get online. We want everybody to be online. We want people to thrive online. We need to make sure they're safe when they do it.
There's this fear that you're missing out on something when you're not connected, right? I think a lot of folks basically have that anxiety. But at the same time, we can't just rely on government regulation to be the police. We as parents in our households need to monitor what our children are watching and reading and looking at online. And so I think there is a component of social responsibility that we need to take upon ourselves in order to be to protect the interests of our children, especially when it comes to their mental health.
Could not agree more, absolutely.
So
and by the way, that's part of what we're going to try and do in this task force, is put out a set of good common sense things that parents can do to help protect their kids, and also things that we want industry to do to make sure the services are safer.
Yeah, the education piece is critically component, not just in this, but in every sector of the federal government. And so, you know, that's where LULAC has been at the forefront and will continue to be, and hopefully we'll continue to partner. Let's talk a little bit about broadband access and adoption. So, considering NTIA's focus on expanding broadband access, what are the main challenges you see in bridging the digital divide, especially in underserved communities?
Well, this is probably one of the biggest things that we're working on right now. Like, we've been talking about the digital divide in this country for over 25 years. And it's hard to imagine, but here we are in 2024, and there are millions and millions, I don't have to tell you, millions of households who are not online, who either can't get a connection or can't afford a connection or don't have the devices they need to get online, don't have the see the content they want when they get there. That is something we have to change, and the good news, it's something that we are changing, right? So we've been talking about the digital divide for 25 years, but thanks to the bipartisan infrastructure law, leadership of President Biden, we now have some resources to really do something serious about it. And my organization is administering a pool of grants, $50 billion in grants. That's billion with a B. It's a lot of money. With the simple goal of making sure that everyone in America has access to reliable, affordable, high-speed internet service. And I think within the decade, we're going to get that done. But it doesn't just stop with access. You're right, we need people to thrive online, not just be able to get a connection. That means we need affordability, and we need to build the skills among the community to make sure that that people thrive.
So we hear a lot about Latino demographics, right?
Yeah.
You know, there are a lot of us, 36 million Latinos, 17, 18% of the population. We talk a lot about the economic impact that Latinos have, $1.6 trillion added to the GDP. But let me ask a different question. Raise your hand if you have broadband access at home, higher than 100 megabytes. Okay? So that's about a third, would you say? A third? Right? How many have broadband access that is very slow? How many of you have problems connecting at home? Issues with accessibility? How many of you are paying over $100 on your cable bills? How many?
That one's a lot, yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot, right? And how many of you have parents Grandparents, are they online? No? Why?
A lot of head shaking.
It's expensive, right? Accessibility, at that point becomes a luxury. And it shouldn't be a luxury. It should be almost a basic right. And that's really what we're talking about when it comes to broadband access.
And, I would just chime in and say, so we know this is important. By 2030, 1 in 5 workers in America are going to be Latino workers. Maybe it's even higher. When you look at the challenges to getting online, one of the things that I was looking up this data, we have this data at NTIA, only 54% of Latinos in America today are using a laptop, a desktop, or a tablet. So everybody's getting on by phone, right? Our data shows that a quarter of U.S. Latinos who are online are a quarter are smartphone only. And the problem with that is, first of all, we were just talking about the problems. Are you even connected? Can you afford the connection? But if you don't have that device, if you're smartphone only, right? I'm sure a lot of people here have raised this challenge, right? How do you do your schoolwork on a phone? How do you do a job interview properly on a phone? How do you do a Zoom call for your work on a phone? And that's part of the challenge too. We've got to look at the whole picture here, right? Not just is there a connection running past your house, but can you afford it? And then do you have the devices necessary to get online? And then the next piece of it is the skills piece, like how do we make sure we're getting people upskilled enough? But it's got to be the whole picture, and I think that's what you're getting at, right?
Yeah, things like telehealth, working virtually, for example, you need to have a really good connection in order to do so, certainly to be competitive in the marketplace today. We're going to come back to broadband, but let's talk a little bit about AI. Let's talk a little bit about ethical AI development. In what ways is NTIA working to ensure that AI development and deployment consider the ethical implications, particularly in preventing bias against Latinos and minority communities?
It's a huge issue, and it's huge because, responsible AI innovation is actually going to make a huge difference in our economy, right? We really believe this is going to touch every part of our economy. And, it's the ChatGPT that people are using now. It's going to make medical outcomes better. It's touching agriculture. It's everything. But the thing is, we're only going to reach that better world where AI helps people if we also deal with the very real risks that it raises right now. And so those are like privacy risks, security risks, risks from bias, right? And those are very real, right? It's not that we're making this up. This is not something in the future, right? So you think about systems like facial recognition systems that are out there in stores, and police departments are using them, and we know they have problems with bias. They discriminate and are inaccurate with communities of color. We have data that shows this, and yet you have police departments out there using this to arrest people erroneously. You've got stores deploying these systems and picking up people for shoplifting that are mistaken identities. That is kind of crazy, right? That's a legal term of art, kind of crazy, right? And we're using these AI systems. We're using them to make employment decisions, to make school admissions decisions, and they've got biases built into them. And so that is the thing we need to address now. Not worrying about, we do worry about the future, and the federal government is spending a lot of time and energy now engaged with AI, thinking about the long-term safety risks, but we need to also think about the now risks. And that's the projects. We've got a couple of projects we're working on. The biggest is around, and I'm happy to talk more about them, making sure that these systems are accountable, and we're looking at the real risks that are in the systems being used now, and we're creating an ecosystem of holding the people who create these systems accountable. And so if a system is out there and it says it's not biased, prove it.
Yeah.
If it says it's protecting privacy, show us. And that's what we need to be working on, and that's what we're working on right now.
And let me be a little bit more clear. Bias is a nice word for discrimination, right?
I'm a diplomat, sorry, yes.
No, we're gonna, it is. And so understanding that, we live in a different era, where discrimination isn't as blatant as signs which we've seen, which is no food or water for Mexicans in the South, going back to the 1920s and the 1940s. This bias comes from two areas. Number one, AI needs data, right? It needs data to process, to develop these language models, if you will, okay? And the content that they're mining is the New York Times, for example, all written content that has been out there. Latino history is really not that deep. We have very few Latino writers. There are very few Latino libraries. There's very few of that content that's been digitized. So we actually, a significantly smaller percentage of the content that's available that they're using to build these large databases and these data models. Bias also happens when the programmers that are writing it lose their cultural context, right? Because there are very few African Americans or there are very few Latinos, right, that are actually doing the programmatic work to develop these models and to develop this. And so, I will share something. When OpenAI, when they had their issues, when the board fired its CEO, I don't know if you all follow that very closely, 779 employees resigned en masse. They resigned en masse, right? And they did so online. It was the first time that we could literally see all the names of the employees working at OpenAI, 779 out of 811. I went through that list, right? I don't want to be biased, but there are about 7 Latinos on that list out of 779 people. I'm sure there were some that, had a different surname, if you will. And so I know that there is not equal representation or proportional representation of Latinos at OpenAI, which is the largest, fastest growing, best capitalized AI company in the world right now, right?
Absolutely.
And so there isn't a simple answer to that, but we as a community need to be more invested in what's happening in that space.
I couldn't agree more, because one of my favorite examples of the bias is just, I don't know if you remember, there was this AI system that the UK experimented, Great Britain experimented with this idea for medical school applications. And they tried to run this system, build an AI system that would help figure out who should get into medical school. And they realized the AI system was really almost entirely recommending men. And they were like, why only men? Why is it so biased for men? And it was because it had looked at the files that it had been trained on, and all the doctors were men. So it thought, well, to be a good doctor, you have to be a man. Well, we know that's not true, and actually maybe the opposite. And but if you train these systems poorly on the wrong data, they jump to conclusions, right? And this is the problem. If we bias data going in means biased data coming out. And why didn't somebody catch that earlier? It's exactly what you're saying. We don't have enough diversity at the table when these systems are being built. So I can't underscore it enough. We need a much more diverse community of people who are helping build these systems, and also helping us in government figure out how to hold them accountable.
And where we see that is, what I call just digital redlining, right? It's digital redlining. You may not realize, but when you are filling out an application for a credit card and you make a mistake and you have to resubmit, you get a higher interest rate, right? If it takes you longer to fill out a home loan online because you have bad internet access, for example, it's slower, the time it takes you to prepare increases the interest rate that you're paying on your mortgage. Where you live is being digital redlined, right? In regards to how they say what the property values are. And they're using computers and algorithms. It's no longer a person that's analyzing this information in an application. It's a computer that is analyzing that information and coming up with an instant picture of who you are and grading you on that. And so that is one of the things that we really need to be focused on.
And I would also say you don't have to have a PhD in computer science to be working on these issues. And that is, I think, one of the things we need to keep thinking about is who's going to be involved as the whole economy moves in this direction. And I would just say this we need people across the country to be thinking about this and how it's used, not just, again, in the most advanced ways, but every part of our economy, every company in America is going to need to use AI in some ways. We were down, I'm looking at Mara here, we were down together at one of my favorite examples, Miami-Dade College.
Yep.
Amazing system.
I went to Miami-Dade Community College.
You're kidding.
I started there.
Okay,
I'm a
I
Miami
actually
kid.
did not know that. I see another one getting a shout out here. Okay, well,
Yeah.
well, look at it. We got a couple, right. Anyway, they have, I don't know if you've seen this, they have a genius program now that they've built on around AI. And the idea, which I think is so brilliant, is they're like, every company in America, small business, large business, is going to need somebody who knows how to use these systems, right? So, and it's not about like, so it's not a lab. Their AI lab isn't about like, how do we build a PhD in facial recognition? It's like, what do you need to know to actually work in a company, a small business, and use AI? And they've built a whole program around how to use these new systems like ChatGPT and the large language models and Google system and Microsoft system. And they do starting at a certificate, 6-month degree, 2-year community college degree, 4-year degree. You don't need to be, again, as a PhD. What you need to know is know how to do this stuff. And I think Miami-Dade is going to pave the way for a lot of colleges and community college systems getting our workforce upskilled and engaged on this stuff. That is what we need. We need it at a huge scale. And anyway, I had no idea about your Miami-Dade connection. You should check it out. It's a brilliant program.
Yeah, Eduardo Padron has been a great leader there, and he's a good friend, and I know he's no longer there, but that's where I started. I was there for 3 or 4 semesters before I went to New York, and then went to Borough Manhattan Community College. So you can start at Borough Manhattan Community College and actually really attain a very successful career in technology.
And I'd say we need the PhDs too, but we need the scale. We need it both. We need all the levels.
Yeah. So, let's talk a little about how NTIA collaborates with these tech companies, because you are not a regulator, right?
No.
So how do you collaborate with these tech companies and community leaders to create a policy framework that encourages inclusive and fair AI practices?
A lot of what we do is talk about what policy, we're the policy advisor to the president. So we spend a lot of time thinking about what policy ought to look like, what legislation ought to look like, what regulation should look like. And a huge part of it is actually working directly with companies to talk about what best practices are for them. So even just this summer, for example, the president worked with almost a dozen of the large AI companies to talk about their best practices and commitments around AI. We use tools like that to say, okay, you need to make sure you've got the right people at the table, and a diverse workforce is a starting point, and then that you're really addressing these issues like bias. We're also going to be putting out a policy paper on accountability that's going to address these issues too. That's coming in the next, I would say, weeks, not months, so stay tuned for more. And there's other work we're doing like that, working with Congress, working directly with companies to push them to address these issues.
That's excellent. That's wonderful. It's great to hear. So I'm going to kind of go back and doing a little bit of a history lesson here. So the Rural Electrification Act of 1936, you guys ever heard of that? Okay. Marked a pivotal moment in U.S. history, addressing the significant disparity in access to electricity between urban and rural areas. This landmark legislation facilitated the provision of federal loans of the installation of electric distribution. This is why we all have electricity in our homes, and as far out in Idaho, if you will. 74 years earlier to the day, in May 20th, 1862, President Abraham Lincoln signed the Homestead Act, which offered free land for those willing to move to it and cultivate it. I believe that the broadband BEAD program is that significant of legislation and could potentially impact the trajectory of this country. Would you agree?
No pressure, but yeah, sure. So this program, which we're enacting, like I said, the $50 billion to connect everyone in the country, reliable, affordable, high-speed internet service, it's a big deal. It's a big deal. And the president keeps saying he wants to connect everyone, which makes us very nervous because everyone is a lot of people, but we need it. That's what we need today.
So let's talk a little bit about how that challenge works. So LULAC has been very, very engaged in the BEAD project process. We've been advocating in 7 predominantly Latino states: Florida, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California, Illinois, because we have a large contingency there, in Puerto Rico. We provided public comments to that. The challenge is a little bit complicated. We need each of you, when you go back home, if you don't have internet access, or if you think you're paying too much, or if that service isn't good, to tell us and report it to us, okay? And even if it isn't you, if it's a brother, a sister, an abuela, for example, we need to know, because we have to be able to show and prove, right, in a multifamily unit, for example, that there isn't good connectivity, right? If they're not being served by these ISPs and broadband providers in those communities. So after this, we're going to follow up with each of you and ask you to help us with this challenge.
It's so important, I can't underscore, because we have this money, we're going to spend it over the next few years, and one of the key pieces of this is, where does the money get spent? Where are these disconnected areas? And if we don't, we have maps that are supposed to show who's connected and who's not, but I'll tell you, they're not always right. And because a lot of the data comes from some of the big companies who provide the networks, they don't always get it right. That's where we need your help, to make sure that we're spending this money in the right places, and that it's going to, because communities are the ones who really know who's connected and who's not, where you can actually get service and where you can't. And the states are working on this, and I just have to say thank you to LULAC. You folks have been really amazing partners in a whole bunch of states in making sure that they are putting together their plans the right way, and they're working through this process of making sure we're spending the money in the right places. And the money, it's going to happen now. It's going to happen in the next few years. It's worth paying attention. We're only going to get one shot at this, so we got to get it right.
Thank you. Thank you for your leadership on that. They gave me a sign that it's time for us to wrap up, but I have at least one more question. Beyond physical infrastructure, how is NTIA addressing affordability and digital literacy to ensure minority communities can effectively use and benefit these broadband services?
Such a good question, because a connection is only the start, and you've said this too, right? Like, if we can put a wire past a family's home, but if they can't afford the connection, then it doesn't do them any good. And even if they can afford the connection, but they don't have a device, they only have a phone, there's no language content that they can recognize, they don't have the skills, it doesn't help. So we're doing a couple of things real quick. One is, we think about the whole picture, and digital equity. We have a digital equity program, a $3 billion fund. It's part of that big $50 billion, to make sure that people have the tools and skills to get online. And that's going to be a much bigger deal. That's going to be part of this in the coming years. I was out in Phoenix at a Latino community center, that was training and, teaching, especially elderly folks, what does it take to get online and thrive? And, we have to go out and meet everybody where they are. For that community, I went there in the middle of the day, it was older women who were trying to get online. It was the telenovelas. Like I said, what are you doing online? They were like, telenovelas, like on YouTube. That's what they wanted to see. So that's what it took for them to get excited about being online. We've got to go community by community, figure out how to bring people online. The second thing, and we can't finish without saying this, the Affordable Connectivity Program. You might have heard about it today. You're going to hear more about it if you talk to Ana Gomez from the FCC. So important. We have a program that's connecting 23 million families right now with more affordable connections. It's a subsidy program. It's about to run out. And Congress needs to act to keep it going. And it's so important for American families. So those are two big things. If I could say one last thing,
please,
we have to
please
wrap.
do.
I was thinking about your deep cut on history here about electricity. Generations before us did some very big things, right? Electricity to everybody in America, water to everybody in America, build the interstate highway system. This is our big infrastructure moment, right? This is our chance to make sure that everybody in America is connected with the thing that they need to thrive online. A good connection to the internet, the ability to thrive on the internet. That is the key to success in the modern digital economy, and this is our moment. So I'm so glad to be here with you. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your partnership. We couldn't do this. We got to build a movement of people to do this, and you all have been great leaders and partners.
Thank you, Ellen, and thank you for your partnership as well.